It is Memorial Day 2020. And I turned on the TV briefly and saw these people trying to sell crap. Big celebration, selling crap on Memorial Day. I resolved not to buy a goddamn thing they're trying to sell because they don't have their heads on right. It's Memorial Day, you idiots. It's not a fucking holiday. I'm a baby boomer. And some people say, okay, boomer, that's you're old. Well, I guess I am old, but I'm honored to be a baby boomer because that means that my dad fought in the war, and all my friends' dads fought in the war. It's what they did. These kids were 17, 18, 19 years old. Fought the goddamn Nazis and the Japanese. I can't touch that kind of bravery. Holy crap. Uh, My dad didn't talk about it very much, but in his late 80s, he he did tell me one or two stories. I'd like to tell one of them to you. Um, my dad was in the Pacific Theater. He was on the USS Hamlin, which was a seaplane tender. Uh, they would maintain the seaplanes, and they would go search and rescue downed pilots or survivors from torpedoed ships, and the PBYs could land on the water, the seaplane, and pick up the survivors and bring them back to the Hamlin or take them to the hospital ship. And my dad saw from the Hamlin the invasion of Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima. And he told me he would look through the binoculars at the beach when all this carnage was going on, this horrible stuff. And he was just damn glad he was on the Hamlin and not on the damn sand digging in. Well, after the Battle of Iwo Jima, after the island had been secured, captain said, anybody wants to go ashore, look around, you can. You guys have earned that. They took a few shells through the smokestack on the boat, but a few rounds pinging here and there, but they didn't have any loss of life at Iwo Jima on the Hamlin as compared to the beaches of Iwo Jima, the thousands of men that died there. Well, Wink was from Petersburg, Virginia, and he had a buddy, Marshall, who was in the Army, who was on Iwo Jima. And Wink didn't know if he was alive or not. I mean, Wink's looking through the binoculars. All hell had been going on for so long. But Wink said, I'd like to go ashore, sir. And he went ashore and walked onto the beach. And there's still body parts and broken machines, and it was just horrible, he said. And he went up to one of the Army guys there and said, I'm looking for Marshall. He's with company such and such. And the man said, well, what's left of them is at the other end of the island. You got to hike there. Can't spare a Jeep for you. So Wink hiked all the way over there and finally found what was left of the company. And Wink said that he could tell that those guys had been through hell and back. And he found somebody, said, listen, I'm looking for Marshall, who's from Petersburg, Virginia, my hometown. I want to know if he's here, if he's okay. They said, oh yeah, Marshall, yes, he's okay. He's in that tent over there. Well, Wink was damn glad to hear this. And he went over to see Marshall and came up to the tent. Marshall did not know that anybody from Petersburg, Virginia was at Iwo Jima. He didn't know he had any buddies nearby. And he and Winky had grown up together. That was my dad's nickname, Winky. And Wink went to the tent, lifted up the flap, looked in. There was Marshall. Marshall was sitting on a cot, looking down at the floor, which was dirt, just staring at the floor. He'd had a tough time. They'd all had a tough time. And Marshall looked up and saw my dad. And he said, Winky. I mean, it was amazing to Marshall that somebody from Petersburg had found him on Iwo Jima. It was like, you know, Jesus had appeared, or Santa Claus, and all of the, it was such an amazing thing to Marshall that Winky was there. And I guess in Marshall's mind, he'd been through hell and back, and here's a piece of hometown that has just looked into his tent and said, hi, Marshall. Well, Marshall was so happy. And he said, Winky, I've got something special to celebrate. It is so special. I've been saving this and saving it and saving it, and I'll share it with you. And Winky said, all right, that'd be great, Marshall. And Marshall reached into his knapsack and pulled out an old, not old, but pulled out a dusty, hot Coca-Cola. One of those 5-cent bottles of Coke back then. I think it was 8 ounces. But to Marshall, it was about the most precious thing he had. The only real connection he had with civilization was this Coca-Cola. And they hadn't had any Cokes. They barely had water. And Marshall said, Winky, you and I are going to share this. And Wink said, Marshall, I'd be honored. Well, Wink didn't tell Marshall, and he wouldn't tell Marshall, that back on the Hamlin, they had hundreds of Coca-Colas and an ice cream maker, and that they were getting 3 square meals a day. He wouldn't tell Marshall that because it would have taken away from what Marshall was doing and how Marshall was feeling to share this sacred Coca-Cola with Winky. And they sat down in that hot tent, and Marshall had his bayonet and pried the cap off the bottle. And they shared that Coke like it was a communion. You know, I can't touch that. Jesus, I can't touch that. So eventually they wound up back in Petersburg together. And they remained friends for life. Winky said that Marshall was never quite the same, but he was always his friend. And that's a story about Iwo Jima and Marshall and Winky. And I'm proud to be a baby boomer. We had good parents. Can't touch that. Y'all have a good Memorial Day weekend. Don't buy any of that crap on TV.